Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Chiara Sassa, and I am the Start Funds Operations Advisor. During this session, I will be joined by Rob Hill. Rob is a consultant from Humentum UK and has been supporting the Start Funds team and the Start Network Assurance team in developing a financial management and assurance check-in tool as part of the Start Funds wider assurance and accountability framework. Rob will be taking us through a PowerPoint presentation outlining the background and objectives of the tool, as well as the process for its implementation with you, our Start Network member organizations. Thank you for listening in, and over to you, Rob.
Thank you, Chiara. So as Chiara says, this is an introduction to the financial management and assurance check-in tool that's been developed by Humentum and the Start Fund and Start Network over the last 6 months or so. I'll be presenting slides and talking through the presentation, but Chiara will add in if there's anything to add to add a bit of background if required. So a background, an agenda of what we're going to discuss today. So we're looking at the check-in tool. So we'll describe a bit of background and the objective of the tool itself. We'll also link the check-in tool to the Start Fund assurance and accountability framework, which is a wider framework of accountability across the Start Fund and actually the Start Network as well. We'll talk through some of the indicators of concern or red flags with members which may trigger a check-in, so why a check-in will take place. And then we'll describe the check-in process, so what the steps are in completing a check-in, and then describe the next steps following a check-in. So that would be completing a report and then working with the member to complete that report and complete recommendations. So the objective of this session is to introduce the check-in tool, the financial management and assurance check-in tool, and to describe the assurance framework and to understand how the check-in process works, which includes understanding the indicators of concern. So the check-in tool on the right of the slide is a screenshot of the front page of the check-in tool. It's a 36-page document which is available on the Start Network internal network. And the objective of the tool is to support member growth and development through reviewing and strengthening processes and controls and systems at members. And that through that support, that increases the level of accountability between members across the network and increasing the accountability with donors as well, to ensure that members are well protected against potential frauds and conflicts of interest, and also have a good level of accountability on individual grants, so that all network members can be assured that there are sort of high levels of fraud resilience and higher quality of processes and controls with all members across the network. So it's about improving the resilience of the entire network. So the check-in tool itself has been developed over a period of time. So back in maybe up to a year ago, the Start Fund identified a gap in assurance activities. So there are routine processes that the Start Fund completes with all grant recipients, and also routine processes that the Start Network completes with all members, such as due diligence. And then there were more targeted audits and investigations when there was a real serious allegation at a network member. But there was a gap when there were sort of concerns about a member, and there were issues at a member that needed to be investigated and to be understood, but it didn't really warrant a full-scale investigation. So Humentum completed a risk management and compliance review with the Start Fund and also working with the Start Network in the summer of 2022. And the main recommendations coming out of that were that there was a more joined up approach between the Start Network and the Start Fund in understanding risk across the Start Network. And so, for example, that includes a new approach to resourcing risk management activities, and that's borne out by how the check-in tool will be implemented, because it's been jointly prepared by both the Start Fund and Start Network. There's also another recommendation was that there was a revised approach to projects assessments, and so separating out all the compliance and process and system review work that were in the project assessment, and leaving the project assessment as purely focused as a learning tool with the monitoring and evaluation team. And then developing a financial management assurance check-in, which is this tool that we're talking about now, to be much more targeted at organizations that need some support in developing their financial management and more wider sort of systems and controls at the organization. So this assurance and accountability framework has been prepared by the Start Fund team. Some of the text is quite small there. I hope you can read it. So this describes what we were just talking about in the previous slide. Some of the routine processes completed with all Start Network members, for example, due diligence at the very start of the time that a member works with the Start Network. And then through the Start Fund grant awarding process, there are routine processes around project selection and decision making, and then routine processes where a project is completed, so completing project reports and learning exchanges. And then, and for the vast majority of network members, that may be all they see, but then there's some more targeted assessment, targeted processes around where there may be some issues that need to be understood, or maybe supporting a network member with a particular aspect of organizational development. And so what was previously existing were project assessments, where the Start Fund programs and monitoring and evaluation team, the MEAL team, would work with grant recipients on project assessments, understanding what went well and what didn't work so well. And then the new targeted process is the financial management and assurance check-in, which is the sort of fifth layer of this pyramid. And that's probably targeted as a fewer number of network members per year. And it's real sort of targeted support to help a network member grow and develop as they improve their business systems and business processes and essentially and key financial controls. And then the sort of final layer of this pyramid is if there's a real concern or an allegation at a member, then the more detailed investigations and audits will be completed with that member. So the aim of the framework, the assurance and accountability framework, the pyramid we've just looked at there, is to make sure that network members comply with all legal agreements, such as the Start Network membership agreement and the Start Fund handbook, and also individual Start Fund award letters, and also to make sure that members comply with local laws and regulations in whichever country they're based in and operating in. And critically, supporting members managing all fraud risks, safeguarding risks, and critical incident risks, and that includes risks specific to delivering individual grants. So the assurance and accountability framework, the pyramid that we just looked at, is really rooted in making sure that there's strong controls across the Start Network, and with all members complying to a similar level of standards and controls. And this financial management and assurance check-in is a real critical part of that, to make sure that the standards are kept high within the network. So at the start so as the Start Fund team work with members on grants, they may note indicators of concern. So these are sort of areas where, as the Start Fund team, and actually start with the wider Start Network team, start working with members, things that maybe would trigger a check-in would include things like an allegation of fraud or a suspicion of fraud, an allegation of a critical incident, any safeguarding incidents, or if there's examples where grant recipients are not following the Start Fund handbook, and any of the sort of terms either in the Start Network membership agreement or an award letter. So these would be sort of key indicators of concern, and they can be flagged up by the Start Fund programs team, the operations team, or the monitoring and evaluation and learning team. And there's a checklist to help the Start Fund and Start Network team observe potential issues at members. For example, so on a screenshot of the checklist is included here, and it has 2 pages actually. So and these are just sort of typical examples of issues that have been identified with network members and also with Start Fund recipients previously. So, for example, if a proposal is just copied across from alert note text or from previous proposals, or if there are significant changes to project design without discussion with the Start Fund team, or if there's a lack of accountability with an affected population, multiple change requests to projects, if there are poor relations within a consortium, for example, a member might leave a consortium or is poorly coordinating with other consortium members, or if there have been complaints about a member from other consortium members. So this is a second page of this checklist. So it indicates sort of issues with project reports. For example, the target population is different to the original proposal. If there's a lack of quality data, if there are sort of late reporting, and that's also late project reporting and late financial reporting. If the financial reporting is sort of high levels of variance, or actually conversely opposite, sort of 0 variance. So if the budget and actual expenditure is exactly the same, that would also indicate a potential concern. If the financial report is not consistent with the written report, so for example, if you say that you're spending money on one item of activity, but that's not reported in the narrative report, then that would show that something's inconsistent between the 2 reports. And then the final issue is around any issues identified during learning exchanges or project assessments. So these 3 slides here are just showing all the potential indicators of concern that would potentially trigger a check-in. So these are things that in good practice, when a Start Network member is working well with the Start Fund or the Start Network, then these issues hopefully won't occur. But if a member is new to working with the Start Fund, then this is maybe sort of learning and improving their ways of working with the Start Fund. So this does, identifying some of these issues doesn't necessarily mean there's something wrong at the member. It's just this just could be part of the learning growth at the Start Network member. And so these are issues that at the Start Network assurance team, they want to work with members to improve the quality of project reporting, the quality of financial reporting, or the quality of project management or managing of consortiums. So the check-in is then a sort of supported process of learning and growth with a member to help them work on some of these issues that have been causing concern. So to be clear about sort of whose responsibilities within the check-in, so this is the check-in tool is really a tool that's owned now by the Start Network assurance team. So the Start Network head of assurance will make decisions around when to complete a check-in with a member. And the Start Network head of assurance is accountable for completing check-ins, and the Start Network assurance team is responsible for delivering those check-ins. But it's a real cross Start Network and Start Fund tool and process. So there is support from the Start Fund operations team, for example, the monitoring and evaluation team and the programs team, and also the support from the Start Network membership engagement team. And that would be then consulting with the head of Start Funds if there was ever a check-in required. So the route of decision making in completing a check-in is that the recommendation will probably come from the head of Start Funds, and then the decision to complete a check-in is then made by the Start Network head of assurance. And then on completed reports, there may be further reporting to the Save the Children legal team and also to the Start Network Risk and Compliance Committee. And these are these won't get the full outcome of the report, but it will be a sort of summarized high level report that these two stakeholders will get coming out of the check-in process. So just to describe the check-in process, so as we were just talking about, the decision to make a check-in is taken by the Start Fund, Start Network Head of Assurance, and that's following all those indicators of concern. So, and you know, when these may be building up over a period of time, and they're tracked. The indicators of concern are tracked by the Start Fund teams and also the Start Network team, and they'll come to a point when the Start Network Head of Assurance then makes a decision to start a check-in. And from that moment, we estimate there will be approximately 12 weeks elapsed time, but probably 10 working days to complete the check-in. It's a fully remote process. So that would mean staff primarily working in the UK, but could be based anywhere, working with a member over a period of time to complete the check-in. And the initial announcement email will go out, and then within the first 2 weeks, the member of staff who's completing the check-in will start making contact with the member, will review documents, and have an initial kickoff meeting with the member. Then over the next up to 4 weeks, we'll request all the documents required from the network member, and we'll review all of those documents. And this can be a whole range of documents, looking at compliance with local authorities, such as statutory accounts and registration documents. It will also include any policies and procedures at the member to understand how network members have expenditure authorization or procurement or employment policies and procedures, all of those to understand the control environment at the member. And then it will also include any reports prepared for external parties, such as sort of financial reporting for the Start Fund itself. And following all the document review, a lot of the check-in process will be sort of more understood. And at that point, the staff member completing the check-in will then interview a range of staff from across the network member, probably 4 or 5 interviews with key staff members. This will likely include the most senior member of staff, that could be the country director or the chief executive, and will include other senior staff, including program directors and finance directors. So a range of different functions or teams across the network member, to ensure that there's consistent understanding of key controls and key practices. So we estimate that at the end of 6 weeks, all the evidence and all the sort of groundwork will have been done, and the person completing the check-in can then prepare a draft report to understand, to write down all the key findings and recommendations. And this then is so once the draft report is complete, this then becomes a joint report between the network member and the Start Network Assurance team. So the network member will review the report, make sure they understand all the issues raised, and they'll review for any errors, and they will also then start to prepare the action plan or the management response. So this is where a joint action plan is prepared between the assurance team and the network member, and that includes sort of recommendations made, and then with an owner and a delivery date, so whereby the network member takes ownership of each issue to be resolved at the member. So over the next few weeks, this report is finalized between the network member and the Start Network Assurance team to become a joint report, and then we estimate by the end of 12 weeks that report will be finalized and can then be shared with other key stakeholders. That might include more senior staff at the member, and also with key staff at the Start Network and the Start Fund. And the tone of the report and the check-in process is really intended to be supportive and supporting network members with growth and development, so that there's a real clear pathway to improve systems and controls and processes at the network member. So we estimate that the START network assurance team will complete potentially 6 check-ins per year, and so this process will take between 2 and 3 months, and it will probably be 1 or 2 members of staff at the START network assurance team completing this work. So we were just looking at the process to complete a check-in, which we estimate will take up to 12 weeks, and in the real detail of the check-in, we have 7 sections which are listed on the screen here. So governance, risk and compliance, which is looking at how a network member is registered with local authorities and how the network member is governed and how they manage risks. Second area is internal and external reporting, so how network members prepare budgets, especially for projects, so looking at the START fund budget preparation process and how network members complete any internal project reporting and also external project reporting, and also looking at the annual planning process. Then the third area of work within the sort of heart of the check-in is looking at the control environment at the network member, so looking at cash management, bank account management, if there's segregation of duty on all areas of financial management, for example, 2 signatories on bank accounts, and 2 authorizations on items of expenditure. Also looking at asset management, for example, management of large assets such as vehicles or small assets such as computers and how they're managed. And that may be relevant to START fund recipients or not. So if an area of the check-in is not relevant to a member, then it won't be completed with the member. The fourth area is looking at how network members work with affected communities, especially looking at things like safeguarding policies and procedures, and also linked into that is verification of affected communities, especially where there's cash distribution projects, which I know is a common area within START fund grant recipients. The fifth section of work is looking at expenditure management and recording transactions. So that looks all the way through from how an item of expenditure is authorized and paid, and the controls on the bank account, but then also looking at how it's recorded in an accounting system and making sure that it's consistent with the invoice or whatever form of evidence there is from the supplier. Sixth area is looking at procurement, so procurement policies for large items of procurement, and also how any equipment is stored, for example, warehousing and stock management, and then also looking at transportation of both goods and also people, so things like vehicle logs and how the costs of any transport are allocated to projects. And then the final section looks at human resources or people, and just looking at things like staff contracts, and also looking at payroll. So, and really looking at how costs are allocated into projects again. So, for example, if a staff member's time is split between a number of projects, how those costs are allocated and then recorded. So for each of these sections, there are documents to look at. So when we're looking at the check-in process on the previous slide, there are documents for each of these sections which need to be sort of requested from each member by the person completing the check-in and then reviewed. And then following the document review for each section, there will then be follow-up questions with staff members. So for example, on the governance, risk and compliance section, that's likely to be with an interview with the chief executive or a senior member of staff, the country director, maybe. On the the reporting section and planning and budgeting, that's likely to be an interview with a program director or a senior program manager to understand how budgets are prepared. When looking at the control environment, that's likely to be an interview with a finance manager or finance director. Looking at affected communities, that may also be an interview with a program manager. or program director. Looking at expenditure, transaction recording, that's likely to be an interview with a finance manager. Procurement, warehouse and transport is likely to be an interview with maybe a logistics manager or operations manager. And the final section around human resources and payroll is likely to be an interview with an HR manager or director. So as you can see, there's a wide range of people involved in the check-in and also documents required for the check-in to be complete. And that's why we give a sort of long time frame for completing all the interviews, to make sure that the check-in sort of fits in with the member diaries or commitments, and so there's up to 2 or 3 weeks to complete all these interviews. So the format, so just there's a screenshot here of one page of the check-in document, and the format is really in the form of questions. So this is on the governance, risk and compliance section. So is the organisation registered with relevant local authorities, for example, companies registrations or NGO board or tax authorities? And are those registrations up to date? So for that, the person completing the check-in would look for registration documents or like company registration certificates, and make sure that if there's any annual submissions required, that there's a recent evidence of that submission. If there's a set of annual audited accounts submitted to the local authorities, then also asking to see those and to see the audit certificate. So these are just the sorts of examples of the sorts of questions that the person completing the check-in will complete. And the verification is primarily through documents, but then that will then be backed up by the interview. And so, if the registrations are up to date, then there is no finding, because the answer is yes, they're fine. But if they're not, then the recommendation is that the organisation is adequately registered, and that would be something that would be followed up in a recommendation or an observation following the check-in. So following the completion of all the fieldwork, for example, the document review and the staff interviews, the Start Network assurance team member completing the check-in will produce a draft report with recommendations, and that will be in the format of an action plan, really, for the network member to work on and to implement and improve systems and controls and processes at the member. And the recommendations are probably categorized into sort of high risk, medium risk and low risk categories. For example, on the previous slide, we were talking about registrations with local government authorities or the NGO board. That would be a high risk finding if those registrations were not up to date, and because that really affects the organization's ability to function in the country they're working in. And then the Start Network assurance team and the network member will then review this report together, and reviewing for any errors, inaccuracies, and also the member will then take ownership of each recommendation and write a member's response to each finding, and add a staff member at the member who is responsible for delivering each recommendation, and they will then commit to a time frame or a deadline to complete the recommendation by. And once this, and we estimate this time, this will take 2 or 3 weeks to complete the finalization of the report. So the report will go back and forth between the network member and the network assurance team, maybe a couple of times as it's clarified and improved. So we have a final action plan for organizational improvement at the member. And then the final version of the report's created and shared with appropriate stakeholders. So I think it's unlikely that it will be a completely public document, but it will go to some key staff at the Start Network and also at the network member itself. So it's understood and can then be followed up. And we then think that will likely to be a sort of quarterly review meeting to just check on the progress of completing the recommendations. And the format of the report is likely to look something like this. So the heart of it will be a table that you see in section 3, which will have a finding and a recommendation, a management response, and then an owner and a completion date. Although that could be summarized in sort of section 1, there will be a summary of the key findings, probably the high risk and medium risk findings. And that will maybe be in a format that could be shared with other key stakeholders, such as the Save the Children legal team and maybe the START Network Risk and Compliance Committee. Great. Okay, that's I think everything. So thank you for joining the presentation and for listening. And I think if you've got any questions, Chiara will maybe just explain now if there's any follow-up. Chiara, do you want to join in?
Yes, thank you, Rob, for this presentation. This was really helpful. I would like to add that during this process, should it be triggered, START funds and START network teams will work with you and support you as best as we can, and calibrating the check-in tool, the check-in process as well, depending on available capacity of each individual member. Thank you very much for listening in, for taking the time to listen in, and please feel free to reach out to us, including via the START Fund inbox, should you have any further questions or comments on this. So thank you very much, everyone, and bye.
Thank you. Bye.